Most forgiving people of YouTube, a horrible thing has happened. As I was recording this almost 2 hour, actually probably more than 2 hour episode, apparently Audacity crashed. But obviously because I was recording a 2 hour episode, I found out about this only after I was done recording a 2 hour episode of XENONAUTS. So there's only 15 minutes of the actual live commentary remaining. Out of the 2+ hour, I think it's like 2 hours and 10 minutes of footage or something like that, 2 hours and 5 minutes. So only 15 minutes of that survived through techno magic, and the rest isn't really there. But because I'm playing the game in Iron Man mode, I can't really replay it, nor do I actually want to replay this mission because it's well, I mean, I guess this is not a spoiler, but it's pretty tense. You'll see. So instead, I decided to put up the footage as is, but instead of just having it silent or just the game sound without any commentary, I decided to read you War and Peace by Lev Tolstoy from the very beginning. So after this introduction, you will have the 15 minutes that survived, and after that, it will be War and Peace. And once more, my apologies for losing the footage. It was kind of out of my hands, unfortunately. Possibly it was lost because I was recording for such a long time. I think Audacity doesn't really handle stuff that is longer than like hour and a half for some reason. But it is what it is. It's Iron Man mode. It cannot be redone. And I hope you like Tolstoy. People of YouTube, it's time for XENONAUTS. And we saw a carrier last time, and that got me really excited. In a, non-sexual way, unfortunately. So I'm hoping that they're gonna return, and if they do, we can then use them for harvesting that guy over here, that one. Because we really want that guy. He's gonna prove vital to our advancement of narrative, without which we're just gonna be fighting carriers all day long. So, just to remind you, we're not researching anything because we ran out of things to research. That's why I closed down one of the labs. As you can see here, I don't have a hangar instead, but in that hangar soon we're gonna have another marauder, which is happening right there. Oh, 1 day, 10 hours. That's actually pretty close. And we definitely have the money for that. We have no active ground battle missions possibilities because there was like 2, but I shut them down. Well, whatever. Bomb, airstrike. I have airstricken it. And we didn't probably need to transfer that Fox. As soon as we get the Marauder, I'll just transfer that Foxtrot over here, something like that. That's the sort of situation. We're just gonna need to wait for like a day and a half. Troops are doing okay. We're down 1 person, and that person is Hamus, if I'm not mistaken. I never really received anyone new, so I think we should maybe order some new people in, and also probably transfer some stuff to the poor bastards over in the other base. Like we could give them some wolf armor, right? I think we can. So let's say we can just give them 4 wolf armor. This is not sell, this is transfer. Okay, so yeah, it's only 1 base, sell base we have. Boom, boom, boom. Come what? Why can't I transfer more? Why? Oh, is it because I'm selling them over here? Huh? That shouldn't work that way. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, don't work that. We're giving them anything else. We're definitely not gonna use this again. So, laser pistol. I already have that. Precision laser. Yeah. Yep. Maxstorm, I can't give you that. Laser plasma carbine. I may need that at some point, so I won't be able to give you that. And we need to just sell this jackal armor. There's no reason to keep it here anyway. So that's 16, yeah, whatever, transfer. And sell the jackal armor because that's 20 grand? Are you serious? Jesus, okay. Sell it. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think Hamus actually could potentially... Oh yeah, it could get better, I was going to say. But also we can just order some other people. Where's Hamus? Oh yeah, he's also gonna be back pretty soon. Dantek's also wounded. That's right, we have Dantek too. Let's see if we have any good soldiers to hire. There's some alright stuff here, but not great. Carmen Romero. Pff, sort of medium. Oh great, neighbors knocking on the walls. That's just what we need. Angus has a lot of hit points, and is strong. Not very accurate. Could be like a shield if one of the shields die. Who's just this crap accuracy all over the place? 54, that's okay, see? 54, 41, it's workable. So this is like an all-around medium dude, or actually lady, I guess. Leah? Let's just get one. Just have them. Hire selected. Good reflexes, but other than that, actually, it's actually pretty decent-ish. Let's get Kate as well. Stop there for now. When they arrive, we just name them up. Okay. Yeah, spin the clock. There isn't that much else to do. Do not operatives have identified an extraterrestrial base in the Oh, there it is. I didn't even see it at first. Oh, cool. Right, so that's why Asia's been all upset. Yup. Man, South America is... Oh, we're gonna lose South America if we don't do anything about it. Or we just should not let them fly around there anymore. Actually, why don't we build another radar in there? Are we not building another radar in there? Or we're building this? We should get another radar in there. Definitely. Because that will allow us to possibly save South America at some point. Because I think we can have even more. So that first one has 25 and this one has 20, I think. Yeah, whatever, it's cool. Either way. It's a lot of money though, but I mean whatever. We'll get it back somehow. Cool. So we're still getting a mill anyway, so it's good. We could go there for this mission. There's a lot of bases. Oh shit, sorry. There's a lot of bases going on. Which is okay. We would need another. We would need another. How bad are you? 61. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty bad. Because it's Screwby, right? Yeah, Screwby's not in a great shape. Arcania Forbidden is also not in a great shape. Oh wow! Right now, Reynolds and Arcania Forbidden are the leaders in the gang. That's pretty funny. Yeah, we need another Iron Man. I'll probably wait for Hamas. Hamas then could. Man, this isn't great. Maybe if Shade Fist comes back. I'll wait a little bit longer for the base. Not gonna do the base right now. Just want to see if other. Wow, they're just messing Asia up. Wow, there's a lot of money going down the drain there. Shit. Okay. See if we have new people available. Not yet. So what's the curing rate looks like? 1 day. Hames is gonna be back in 1 day. His HPs are only going to be like 40 something, so we need to save him from getting hit. Other than that, we can use him technically. Alright, let's just wait for him to come back up. Yeah, he's still not up there. Okay, cool. Let's wait for a bit longer. Okay, while we're at it, let's do this as well. So get rid of this, put your wolf armor on. Wolf armor. So you guys gonna be alright. We're building your defenses. Oh Jesus, you can't. You have no strength. Oh boy. Oh boy. I don't think you can do this, man. Double pistol? There you go. Odog. Yep, Odog, this isn't looking that good. I'll give you a carbine there. Yeah, I will sort the details out later. Yeah, it's gonna be fine. Alright. So base is a thing. Hamas is still sick? You serious? Oh no, he's unassigned now. Alright, let's wait for nighttime to sort of slightly wash over the base. And then we go take it out, I guess. Sort of like that. I think that should be enough to get there on time. Alright. Now put Hamus in the thing. I guess he's the best candidate. It's very unfortunate that... change role to Iron Man. I know. But that's not what you're taking anyway. You're not taking this, buddy. You are taking that. Also, you don't even need that many of that. It's much better to have whatever this is. Actually. There. That's gonna be your thing. 51. But that's 51 out of 87. It's such a low health. We need to be very careful with Hamas. We can still have him, but we need to watch out. Okay. He is super, super vulnerable. Alright, let's go get it. Let's do this base. I don't think there's anything else I need to add to the troops here. You all have what you need, really. Flying doesn't help you here much, but whatever. So, yeah, Screwby's a danger of dying, and... Where's Arcania? Oh wait, we just add... Yeah, we didn't add him into the thing. There you go. Now he's in. Okay, cool. Then we were good. And Arcania is also 66, so it's pretty bad. And this is 4 hours away. Alright, anyway. Go get it. While we're going there, I think usually the aliens do not appear. So we should be okay. Wow, that still takes a long time. Okay, cool. So that's been made. Max Storm. Excellent. Let's take a look at the base itself, alright? That's good. So we can send now this Foxtrot over to... So let's actually rename. So Levko wants to be Immortal, obviously. So this is going to be Levko. And this is not going to be Levko anymore. It's going to be Foxtrot Z. You serious? Are people drilling now? Alright, that's weird. Sorry, maybe you can't even hear those noises, but it's just a bit disheartening when you're recording and someone starts drilling. Alright, so that's good, that's good. Yeah, we need to transfer relocate aircraft to is the stand relocate. And then we can go in here. Actually, while we have this gap between the things, we could just quickly maybe build... where did all the money go? Is that the radar money, I guess? Let's quickly build... Is armor essential, or is... They're all gone, aren't they? Yeah, I can't even look at them. Let's build maybe... I was thinking between armor, so either the Sentinel Battlesuit, more Sentinel Battlesuits, or... just the weapons, because we don't really have that many mag weapons. We could get like a mag precision rifle, which is the like mag sniper rifle. Could be cool. Just take 4 days. Yeah, sorry, I think the neighbors are just starting renovating at 8 p.m. So, you know, it happens, unfortunately. Alright, so that's happening. This guy's flying over. We're going for the base. We're good. We should do fine. And we're building, right? We did order them to build. We did. Okay, cool. And they're making a precision thing. Excellent. Alright, base. Here we go. So this is War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. It consists of 15 books, or I guess you could call them volumes. They're called books in this translation. Obviously I'm going to be reading it in English, not in Russian, because very few of you would understand, I imagine. Unless, of course, almost all my audience are secretly Russians. Anyway, so it's about 15 books. All of them have tons of chapters, and it spans about 15 years of historical time. So it's not a small book, but we're gonna start at the very beginning. It's book 1, chapter 1. Well, Prince, so... Oh, by the way, the historical stuff, I may not know how to pronounce properly the names. I haven't looked them up specifically, so this is very much a first impression reading. You can think of it as a... not a review, but a first impression reading of this book. Well, Prince, so Genoa and Lucca are now just family estates of the Bonapartes. But I warn you, if you don't tell me that this means war, if you still try to defend the infamies and horrors perpetrated by the Antichrist, I really believe he is Antichrist, I will have nothing more to do with you, and you are no longer my friend, no longer my faithful slave, as you call yourself. But how do you do? I see I have frightened you. Sit down and tell me all the news. It was in July 1805, and the speaker was the well-known Anna Pavlovna Scherer, maid of honor and favorite of the Empress Maria Fedorovna. With these words she greeted Prince Vasily Kuragin, a man of high rank and importance, who was the first to arrive at her reception. Anna Pavlovna had a cough for some days. She was, as she said, suffering from la grippe. Grippe being... Is that how you pronounce it? I'm not sure again. My apologies. Grippe being basically flu, being then a new word in St. Petersburg, used only by the elite. All her invitations, without exception, written in French, and delivered by a scarlet-liveried footman that morning, ran as follows. If you have nothing better to do, Count or Prince, and if the prospect of spending an evening with a poor invalid is not too terrible, I shall be very charmed to see you tonight between 7 and 10. Annette Scherer. Heavens, what a virulent attack, replied the prince, not in the least disconcerted by the reception. He had just entered, wearing an embroidered court uniform, knee breeches and shoes, and had stars on his breast and a serene expression on his flat face. He spoke in that refined French in which our grandfathers had not only spoke but thought, and with the gentle patronizing intonation natural to a man of importance who had grown old in society and at court. He went up to Anna Pavlovna, kissed her hand, presenting to her his bald, scented, and shining head, and complacently seated himself on the sofa. Yeah, so apparently they all speak French to each other, even though I think most of the book is actually written in English, in Russian, and then now it's translated in English. But you are supposed to be sort of thinking that they are speaking French, because it was among the elite in those days in the Russian Empire. It was cool to speak French. That was kind of the language that the aristocrats used. First of all, dear friend, tell me, how are you? Set your friend's mind at rest, said he without altering his tone, beneath the politeness and affected sympathy of which indifference and even irony could be discerned. Can one be well while suffering morally? Can one be calm in times like these if one has any feeling? Said Anna Pavlovna. You are staying the whole evening, I hope. And the fete, I'm not sure, at the English ambassador's? Today is Wednesday. I must put in an appearance there, said the prince. My daughter is coming for me to take me there. I thought today's, again, fete, I'm not sure what it is. Let's actually look it up while we're here, and we are indeed online. So, fete, apparently, is a public function typically held outdoors and organized to raise funds for a charity, including entertainment and the sale of goods and refreshments. Fete. Okay, cool. So the fete, I thought today's fete has been cancelled. I confess, all these festivities and fireworks are becoming wearisome. If they had known that you wished it, the entertainment would have been put off, said Prince, who, like a wound-up clock by force of habit, said things he did not even wish to be believed. Don't tease. Well, and what has been decided about Novosiltsev's dispatch? You know everything? You know everything, sorry, it's not a statement, not a question. What can one say about it? Replied the prince in a cold, listless tone. What has been decided? They have decided that Bonaparte has burnt his boats, and I believe that we are ready to burn ours. Boats, not boots. Prince Vasily always spoke languidly like an actor repeating a stale part. Anna Pavlovna Scherer, on the contrary, despite her 40 years, overflowed with animation and impulsiveness. To be an enthusiast had become her social vocation, and sometimes, even when she did not feel like it, she became enthusiastic in order not to disappoint the expectations of those who knew her. The subdued smile which, though it did not suit her faded features, always played round her lips expressed, as in spoiled child, a continual consciousness of her charming defect, which she neither wished nor could, nor considered it necessary to correct. In the midst of the conversation, on political matters, Anna Pavlovna burst out. "Oh, don't speak to me of Austria. Perhaps I don't understand things, but Austria never has wished, and does not wish, for war. She is betraying us. Russia alone must save Europe. Our gracious sovereign recognizes his high vocation, and will be true to it. That is the one thing I have faith in. Our good and powerful sovereign has to perform the noblest role on earth, and he is so virtuous and noble that God will not forsake him. He will fulfill his vocation and crush the hydra of revolution, which has become more terrible than ever in the person of this murderer and villain. We alone must avenge the blood of the just one. Whom, I ask you, can we rely on? England, with her commercial spirit, will not and cannot understand the Emperor Alexander's loftiness of soul. She has refused to evacuate Malta. She wanted to find and still seeks some secret motive in our actions. What answer did Novosiltsev get? None. The English have not understood and cannot understand the self-abnegation of our emperor, who wants nothing for himself, but only desires the good of mankind. And what have they promised? Nothing. And what little they have promised they will not perform. Prussia has always declared Bonaparte is invincible and that all Europe is powerless before him. And I don't believe a word that Hardenberg says, or Hogwitz either. The famous Prussian neutrality is just a trap. I have faith only in God and the lofty destiny of our adored monarch. We will save Europe." She suddenly paused, smiling at her own impetuosity. I hope I didn't wreck that word. "I think," said the prince with a smile, "that if you had been sent instead of our dear Winzigorod, you would have captured the King of Prussia's consent by assault. You are so eloquent. Will you give me a cup of tea?" "In a moment. Apropos," she added, becoming calm again, "I am expecting two very interesting men tonight. Le Vicomte de Mortemart." I don't speak French. I'm just going to try my best. Sorry if I offend anyone who actually speaks French. My apologies. Who is connected with the Montmorencies through the Rohans, one of the best French families, apparently. He is one of the genuine emigres, the good ones, and also the Abbe Morio. Do you know the profound thinker? He has been received by the emperor. Had you heard? "I shall be delighted to meet them," said the prince. "But tell me," he added with studied carelessness, as if it had only just occurred to him, though the question he was about to ask was the chief motive of his visit. "Is it true that the Dowager Empress wants Baron Funke? Baron. I want to be a Baron Funky. Baron Funky, as I'm going to call him, to be appointed first secretary at Vienna. The Baron, by all accounts, is a poor creature." Prince Vasily wished to obtain this post for his son, but others were trying to through the Dowager Empress Maria Fedorovna to secure it for the Baron. Anna Pavlovna almost closed her eyes to indicate that neither she nor anyone else had a right to criticize what the Empress desired or was pleased with. Baron Funky, let's go with that, has been recommended to the Empress by her sister, was all she said in a dry and mournful tone. As she named the Empress, Anna Pavlovna's face suddenly assumed an expression of profound and sincere devotion and respect mingled with sadness, and this occurred every time she mentioned her illustrious patroness. She added that Her Majesty had deigned to show Baron Funky beaucoup d'estime, and again her face clouded over with sadness. The prince was silent and looked indifferent, but with the womanly and courtier-like quickness and tact habitual to her, Anna Pavlovna wished both to rebuke him for daring to speak as he had done of a man recommended to the Empress, and at the same time to console him. So she said, "Now about your family. Do you know that since your daughter came out, everyone has been enraptured by her? They say she is amazingly beautiful." By the way, came out, in case... I'm not sure this is actually a good translation, because it kind of means a different thing nowadays. Well, a rather different thing. Came out in what they mean here in the sort of 19th century Russia is when a teenager is old enough or considered old enough. Usually this is said about females to be sort of introduced to everyone else, like the society. They come out into the world, they come out into the society. So she didn't come out as, say, that she was gay or something like that. She was most likely brought by her parents to a ball, and where she was introduced around. So she is now a member of the high society of Petersburg, or whatever this is happening. So, and apparently she is amazingly beautiful. The prince bowed to signify his respect and gratitude. "I often think," she continued after a short pause, drawing nearer to the prince and smiling amiably at him as if to show that political and social topics were ended and the time had come to intimate conversation. "I often think how unfairly sometimes the joys of life are distributed. Why has fate given you two such splendid children? I don't speak of Anatoly, your youngest. I don't like him." Jesus, she added in a tone admitting of no rejoinder and raising her eyebrows. "Two such charming children, and really you appreciate them less than anyone, and so you don't deserve to have them." And she smiled her ecstatic smile. "I can't help it," said the prince. Lavater, probably that's how you pronounce it, Lavater would have said I lack the bump of paternity. Okay. "Don't joke. I mean to have a serious talk with you. Do you know I am dissatisfied with your younger son? Between ourselves," and her face assumed its melancholy expression, "he was mentioned at Her Majesty's, and you were pitied." The prince answered nothing, but she looked at him significantly, awaiting a reply. He frowned. What would you have me do?" he said at last. "You know I did all a father could do for their education, and they have both turned out fools. Hippolyte is at least a quiet fool, while Anatoly is an active one. That is the only difference between them," he said, this smiling in a way more natural and animated than usual, so that the wrinkles around his mouth very clearly revealed something unexpectedly coarse and unpleasant. "And why are children born to such men as you? If you were not a father, there would be nothing I could reproach you with," said Anna Pavlovna, looking up pensively. "I am your faithful slave, and to you alone I can confess that my children are the bane of my life. It is the cross I have to bear. This is how I explain it to myself. It can't be helped." He said no more, but expressed his resignation to cruel fate by gesture. Anna Pavlovna meditated. Meditated? Yes, meditated. "Have you never thought of marrying your prodigal son Anatoly?" She asked. "They say old maids have a mania for matchmaking, and though I don't feel that weakness in myself as yet, I know a little person who is very unhappy with her father. She is a relation of yours, Princess Mary Balkonskaya." Prince Vasily did not reply, though. With the quickness of memory and perception befitting a man of the world, he indicated by a movement of the head that he was considering this information. "Do you know," he said at last, evidently unable to check the sad current of his thoughts, "that Anatoly is costing me 40,000 rubles a year? And," he went on after a pause, "what will it be in 5 years if he goes on like this? Presently," he added, That's what we fathers have to put up with. Is this princess of yours rich? Her father is very rich and stingy. He lives in the country. He is the well-known Prince Bolkonsky, who had to retire from the army under the late emperor and was nicknamed the King of Prussia. He is very clever but eccentric and a bore. The poor girl is very unhappy. She has a brother. I think you know him. He married Lise Meinen. Lately, he is an aide-de-camp of Kutuzov's and will be here tonight. Listen, dear Annette, said the prince, suddenly taking Anna Pavlovna's hand and for some reason drawing it downwards. Arrange that affair for me, and I shall always be your most devoted slave with an F, as a village elder of mine writes in his reports. She is rich and of good family, and that's all I want. And with the familiarity and easy grace peculiar to him, he raised the maid of honor's hand to his lips, kissed it, and swung it to and fro as he lay back in his armchair, looking in another direction. Attendez, said Anna Pavlovna, reflecting. I'll speak to Lise, young Bolkonsky's wife, this very evening, and perhaps the thing can be arranged. It shall be on your family's behalf that I'll start my apprenticeship as old maid. Chapter 2. Anna Pavlovna's drawing room was gradually filling. The highest Petersburg society was assembled there. People differing widely in age and character, but alike in the social circle to which they belonged. Prince Vasily's daughter, the beautiful Helen, I guess, even though it's spelled a bit weird, came to take her father to the ambassador's entertainment. She wore a ball dress and her badge as maid of honor. The youthful little Princess Bolkonskaya, known as La Femme la plus séduisante de Petersburg, or Petersburg, or whatever the French pronounce it as, which in English means the most fascinating woman in Petersburg, was also there. She had been married during the previous winter, and being pregnant did not go to any large gatherings, but only to small receptions. Prince Vasily's son, Hippolyte, had come with Mortemart, whom he introduced, the Abbe Mario, I'm gonna go with Abbe Mario, and many others had also come. To each new arrival, Anna Pavlovna said, "You have not yet seen my aunt," or "You do not know my aunt," and very gravely conducted him or her to a little old lady wearing large bows of ribbon in her cap, who had come sailing in from another room as soon as the guests began to arrive, and slowly turning her eyes from the visitor to her aunt, Anna Pavlovna mentioned each one's name and then left them. Each visitor performed the ceremony of greeting this old aunt whom not one of them knew, not one of them wanted to know, and not one of them cared about. Anna Pavlovna observed these greetings with mournful and solemn interest and silent approval. The aunt spoke to each of them in the same words about their health and her own, and the health of Her Majesty, who, thank God, was better today. And each visitor, though politeness prevented his showing impatience, left the old woman with a sense of relief at having performed a vexatious duty, and did not return to her the whole evening. The young Princess Bolkonskaya had brought some work in a gold-embroidered velvet bag. Her pretty little upper lip, on which a delicate dark dawn was just perceptible, was too short for her teeth, but it lifted all the more sweetly, and was especially charming when she occasionally drew it down to meet the lower lip. I think a little comment I can say here. I've noticed in a lot of the 19th century Russian literature, there is a bit of a fascination with, I think that's what they're talking about here as well, with a bit of a female mustache going on. And apparently, I think, if I remember correctly from sort of like the classic Russian literature as well, that it was a big thing in that period, possibly not only in Russia, but it's often mentioned as almost like this sexual thing that women have, as a little tiny, almost non-perceptible mustache going on the upper lip. and it was considered, I think, beautiful, as I understand, and if I remember correctly, and I think that's what they're talking about here. As is always the case with the thoroughly attractive woman, her defect, the shortness of her upper lip and her half-open mouth, seemed to be her own special and peculiar form of beauty. Everyone brightened at the sight of this pretty young woman, so soon to become a mother, so full of life and health, and carrying her burden so lightly. Old men and dull, dispirited young ones who looked at her, after being in her company and talking to her a little while, felt as if they too were becoming like her, full of life and health. All who talked to her and at each word saw her bright smile and the constant gleam of her white teeth thought that they were in a special, amiable mood that day. The little princess went around the table with quick, short, swaying steps, her work bag on her arm, and gaily spreading out her dress, sat down on a sofa near the silver samovar, as if all she was doing was a pleasure to herself and to all around her. Samovar, if you don't know, is a tea-making device popular in Russia. It's used today as well. It's like a giant kettle. You can think of it like that. I have brought my work, said she in French, displaying her bag and addressing all present. Mind, Annette, I hope you have not played a wicked trick on me, she added, turning to her hostess. You wrote that it was to be quite a small reception, and just see how badly I am dressed. And she spread out her arms to show her short-waisted, lace-trimmed, dainty grey dress, girdled with a broad ribbon just below the breast. Sois tranquille, I guess, which means be calm. Lise, you will always be prettier than anyone else, replied Anna Pavlovna. I should have really chosen a book that actually uses a language I understand as opposed to French. You know, said the princess in the same tone of voice and still in French, turning to a general. My husband is deserting me. He is going to get himself killed. Tell me what this wretched war is for, she added, addressing Prince Vasily, and without waiting for an answer, she turned to speak to his daughter, the beautiful Helen. What a delightful woman this little princess is, said Prince Vasily to Anna Pavlovna. One of the next arrivals was a stout, heavily built young man with close-cropped hair, spectacles, the light-colored breeches fashionable at the time, a very high ruffle, and a brown dress coat. This stout man was an illegitimate son of Count Bezukhov, I think, a well-known grandee of Catherine's time, who now lay dying in Moscow. The young man had not yet entered either the military or civil service, as he had only just returned from abroad where he had been educated, and this was his first appearance in society. Anna Pavlovna greeted him with the nod she accorded to the lowest hierarchy in her drawing room. But in spite of this lowest grade greeting, a look of anxiety and fear, as at the sight of something too large and unsuited to the place, came over her face when she saw Pierre enter. Though he was certainly rather bigger than the other men in the room, her anxiety could only have reference to the clever, though shy, but observant and natural expression which distinguished him from everyone else in that drawing room. It is very good of you, Monsieur Pierre, to come and visit a poor invalid, said Anna Pavlovna, exchanging an alarmed glance with her aunt as she conducted him to her. Pierre murmured something unintelligible and continued to look round as if in search of something. On his way to the aunt, he bowed to the little princess with a pleased smile as to an intimate acquaintance. Anna Pavlovna's alarm was justified, for Pierre turned away from the aunt without waiting for her speech about Her Majesty's health. Anna Pavlovna, in dismay, detained him with the words, "Do you know the Abb Mario?" Again, I'm sorry if this is the wrong pronunciation of whoever this is name. He is the most interesting man. So I have heard of his scheme for perpetual peace, and it is very interesting, but hardly feasible. You think so, rejoined Anna Pavlovna, in order to say something and get away to attend to her duties as hostess. But Pierre now committed a reverse act of impoliteness. First he had left the lady before she had finished speaking to him, and now he continued to speak to another who wished to get away. With his head bent and his big feet spread apart, he began explaining the reasons for thinking the abb's plan chimerical, I guess. "We will talk of it later," said Annapolna with a smile. And having got rid of this young man who did not know how to behave, she resumed her duties as hostess and continued to listen and watch, ready to help at any point where the conversation might happen to flag. As a foreman of spinning mill, then he has as the foreman of a spinning mill, when he has set the hands to work, goes around and notices here a spindle that has stopped, or there one that creaks or makes more noise than it should, and hastens to check the machine or set it in a proper motion. So Anna Pavlovna moved about her drawing room, approaching now a silent, now a too noisy group, and by a word or slight rearrangement kept the conversational machine in steady, proper, and regular motion. But amid these cares, her anxiety about Pierre was evident. She kept an anxious watch on him when he approached the group round Mortemar to listen to what was being said there, and again when he passed to another group whose center was the Abbey, whatever, again. Pierre had been educated abroad, and this reception at Anna Pavlovna's was the first he had attended in Russia. He knew that all the intellectual lights of Petersburg were gathered there, and, like a child in a toy shop, did not know which way to look, afraid of missing any clever conversation that was to be heard. Seeing the self-confident and refined expression on the faces of these present, he was always expecting to hear something very profound. At last he came up to Mario. Here the conversation seemed interesting, and he stood waiting for an opportunity to express his own views, as young people are fond of doing. Chapter 3. Anna Pavlovna's reception was in full swing. The spindles hummed steadily and ceaselessly on all sides, with the exception of the aunt, beside whom sat only an elderly lady, who with her thin, careworn face and rather out of place, was rather out of place in this brilliant society. The whole company had settled into 3 groups. One, chiefly masculine, had formed round the Abbey. I again still don't know who the hell this guy is. The Mario guy, I think, apparently. Another of young people was grouped around the beautiful Princess Helen, Prince Vasily's daughter, and the little Princess Balkonskaya, very pretty and rosy, though rather too plump for her age. The third group was gathered round Mortemar and Anna Pavlovna. The Vicomte, which is I think the French for Viscount in British, which is a guy, basically an aristocrat, above baron, below an earl, if I remember correctly. So basically this French aristocrat guy was a nice-looking young man, I'm guessing this is Mortemart, with soft features and polished manners, who evidently considered himself a celebrity, but out of politeness modestly placed himself at the disposal of the circle in which he found himself. And Apollonia was obviously serving him up as a treat to her guests, as a clever maître d'hôtel serves up a specially choice delicacy, a piece of meat that no one who had seen it in the kitchen would have cared to eat. So Anna Paulina served up to her guests. That's a very messed up sentence. Not in terms of content, just the wording. So Anna Paulina served up to her guests first the Vicomte and then the Abbé, the Mario dude, as peculiarly choice morsels. The group about Mortemar immediately began discussing the murder of the Duc d'Enghien. The Vicomte said that Duc d'Enghien had perished, again I apologize for my pronunciation of anything French, has perished by his own magnanimity, and that there were particular reasons for Bonaparte's hatred of him. Yes, do tell us about all about it, Vicomte said Anna Paulina, with a pleasant feeling that there was something à la Louis XV in the sound of that sentence. Comtesse nous cela, Vicomte. Comtesse no cela, Vicomte. There's no translation? Are you serious? Oh, whatever that means. The Viscount bowed and smiled courteously in token of his willingness to comply, and Apollina arranged a group around him, inviting everyone to listen to his tale. I guess this chapter is going to be his tale. The Viscount knew the Duke personally, whispered Apollina to one of the guests. The Viscount is a wonderful raconteur, I guess teller of stories is meant, said she to another. How evidently he belongs to the best society, said she to a third, and the Viscount was served up to the company in the choicest and most advantageous style, like a well-garnished joint of roast beef on a hot dish. The Viscount wished to begin his story and gave a subtle smile. Come over here, Helen, dear, said Apollina to the beautiful young princess, who was sitting some way off the center of another group. The princess smiled. She rose with the same unchanging smile with which she had first entered the room. She had the smile of a perfectly beautiful woman, with a slight rustle of her white dress trimmed with moss and ivy, with a gleam of white shoulders, glossy hair, and sparkling diamonds. She passed between the men who made way for her, not looking at any of them, but smiling on all, as if graciously allowing each the privilege of admiring her beautiful figure and shapely shoulders, back and which in the fashion of those days were very much exposed, and she seemed to bring the glamour of a ballroom with her as she moved towards Apollina. Helen was so lovely that not only did she not show any trace of coquetry, but on the contrary, she even appeared shy of her unquestionable and all too victorious beauty. She seemed to wish, but to be unable to diminish this effect. How lovely, said everyone who saw her, and the Viscount lifted his shoulders and dropped his eyes as if startled by something extraordinary when she took her seat opposite and beamed upon him also with her unchanging smile. Madame, I doubt my ability before such an audience, said he, smiling, inclining his head. The princess rested her bare round arm on the little table and considered a reply unnecessary. She smilingly waited. All the time the story was being told... Oh, we're not gonna hear the story? Oh, come on. All the time the story was being told, she sat upright, glancing now at her beautiful round arm, altered in shape by its pressure on the table, now at her still more beautiful bosom, and on which she readjusted a diamond necklace. From time to time she smoothed the folds of her dress, and whenever the story produced an effect, she glanced at Apollina at once, adopted just the expression she saw on the maid of honor's face, and again replaced into her radiant smile. The little princess had also left the tea table and followed Helen. Wait a moment, I'll get my work. Now then, what are you thinking of? She went on, turning to Prince Hippolyte. Fetch my work bag. There was a general movement as the princess, smiling and talking merrily to everyone, at once sat down and gaily arranged herself in her seat. Now I am all right, she said, and asking the Viscount to begin, she took up her work. Prince Hippolyte, having brought the work bag, joined the circle, and moving a chair close to hers, seated himself beside her. La charmante Hippolyte was surprising by his extraordinary resemblance to his beautiful sister. Okay, so the charming Hippolyte, I guess, was surprising. All right. But yet more by the fact that in spite of his resemblance, he was exceedingly ugly. Excellent. His features were like his sister's, but while in the case everything was lit up by a joyous, self-satisfied, youthful, and a constant smile of animation, and by the wonderful classic beauty of her figure, his face, on the contrary, was dulled by imbecility and a constant expression of sullen self-confidence, while his body was thin and weak. His eyes, nose, and mouth all seemed puckered into a vacant, wearing grimace, and his arms and legs always fell into unnatural positions. Interesting thing, by the way, every time I find a character in Russian, 19th century Russian literature whose name is Hippolyte, it always some guy who is kind of weird, very weak, can't really do anything, complains a lot, something like that. It's just, I guess it's like a stereotypical name for, I don't know, it's weird. It's like a name that is the typecast character. It's not going to be ghost story. It's not going to be a ghost story, said he, sitting down beside the princess and hastily adjusting his lorgnette, as if without his instrument he could not begin to speak. Lorgnette, I think, is a type of glasses, I think. But the one that you don't, like, you hold it with your hand, in your hand, and then put it next to your face, as opposed to wearing them like modern glasses. "Why no, my dear fellow," said the astonished narrator, shrugging his shoulders. "Because I hate ghost stories," said Prince Hippolyte in a tone which showed that he only understood the meaning of his words after he had uttered them. He spoke with such self-confidence that his hearers, okay, or do you think listeners, anyway, could not be sure whether whether what he said was very witty or very stupid. He was dressed in a dark green dress coat, knee breeches of the color of cuisse de nymphe effraie, whatever that is, as he called it, shoes and silk stockings. Okay, that's the end of that amazing sentence. The Vicomte told his tale very neatly. It was an anecdote, then current, to the effect that the Duc d'Enghien had gone secretly to Paris to visit Mademoiselle George. That at her house he came upon Bonaparte, who also enjoyed the famous actress' favors, and that in his presence Napoleon happened to fall into one of the fainting fits to which he was subject, and was thus at the Duc's mercy. The latter spared him, and his magnanimity, and this magnanimity Bonaparte subsequently repaid by death. The story was very pretty and interesting, especially at the point where the rivals suddenly recognized one another and the ladies looked agitated. The story was very... sorry, that's already already. Charming, said Anna Pavlovna with an inquiring glance at the little princess. Charming, whispered the little princess, sticking the needle into her work as if to testify that the interest and fascination of the story prevented her from going on with it. The Vicomte appreciated this silent praise and, smiling gratefully, prepared to continue, but just then Anna Pavlovna, who had kept a watchful eye on the young man who so alarmed her, noticed that he was talking too loudly and vehemently with the Abbé, so she hurried to the rescue. Pierre had managed to start a conversation with the Abbé about the balance of power, and the latter, evidently interested by the young man's simple-minded eagerness, was explaining his pet theory. Both were talking and listening too eagerly and too naturally, which was why Anna Pavlovna disapproved. "The means are the balance of power in Europe and the rights of the people," the Abbé was saying. "It is only necessary for one powerful nation like Russia, barbaric as she is said to be, to place herself disinterestedly at the head of an alliance having for its object the maintenance of the balance of power of Europe, and it would save the world." "But how are you to get that balance?" Pierre was beginning. At that moment Anna Pavlovna came up and, looking severely at Pierre, asked the Italian how he stood Russian climate. The Italian's face instantly changed and assumed an offensively affected, sugary expression, evidently habitual to him when conversing with women. "I am so enchanted by this brilliancy of the wit and culture of the society, more specifically of the feminine society in which I have had the honor of being received, that I have not yet had time to think of the climate," said he. Not letting the Abbé and Pierre escape, Anna Pavlovna, the more conveniently to keep them under observation, brought them into the larger circle. Chapter 4. Just then another visitor entered the drawing room. Prince Andrew Bolkonsky, the little prince's husband. He was a very handsome young man of medium height with firm, clear-cut features. Everything about him, from his wary, bored expression to his quiet, measured step, offered a most striking contrast to his quiet little wife. It was evident that he not only knew everyone in the drawing room, but had found them to be so tiresome that it wearied him to look at or listen to them. And among all these faces that he found so tedious, none seemed to bore him so much as that of his pretty wife. He turned away from her with a grimace that distorted his handsome face, kissed Anna Pavlovna's hand, and, screwing up his eyes, scanned the whole company. You're off to war, Prince, said Anna Pavlovna. General Kutuzov, said Balkonsky, speaking French and stressing the last syllable of the general's name like a Frenchman, has been pleased to take me as an aide-de-camp, which I guess is kind of like a, whatever, like a servant, but not really, just kind of the person accompanying the, the general, whatever, something like that. Aide in the camp would be probably the English version. Again, my apologies for my lack of knowledge of French. And Lise, your wife, she will go to the country. Are you not ashamed to deprive us of your charming wife? André, said his wife, addressing her husband in the same coquettish manner in which she spoke to other men. The Vicomte has been telling us such a tale about Mademoiselle George and Bonaparte. Prince Andrew screwed up his eyes and turned away. Pierre, who from the moment Prince Andrew entered the room had watched him with glad, affectionate eyes, now came up and took his arm. Before he looked round, Prince Andrew frowned again, expressing his annoyance with whoever was touching his arm, but when he saw Pierre's beaming face, he gave him an unexpectedly kind and pleasant smile. There now, so you too are in the great world, said he to Pierre. I knew you would be here, replied Pierre. I will come to support us to supper with you, may I? He added in a low voice as not to disturb the Vicomte, who was continuing his story. No, impossible, said Prince Andrew, laughing and pressing Pierre's hand to show that there was no need to ask the question. He wished to say something more, but at the moment Prince Vasily and his daughter got up to go, and the two young men rose to let them pass. You must excuse me, dear Vicomte, said Prince Vasily to the Frenchman, holding him down by the sleeve in a friendly way to prevent his rising. This unfortunate fate at the ambassador's deprives me of the pleasure, and obliges me to interrupt you. I am very sorry. I'm very sorry. Where's the rest of this? Oh, there we go. I'm very sorry to leave you your enchanting party, said he, turning to Anna Pavlovna. His daughter, Princess Helen, passed between the chairs, lightly holding up the folds of her dress, and the smile shone still more radiantly on her beautiful face. Pierre gazed at her with rapturous, almost frightened eyes as she passed him. Very lovely, said Prince Andrew. Very, said Pierre. In passing, Prince Vasily seized Pierre's hand and said to Anna Pavlovna, educate this bear for me. He has been staying with me a whole month, and this is the first time I have seen him in society. Nothing is so necessary for a young man as the society of clever women. Anna Pavlovna smiled and promised to take Pierre in hand. She knew his father to be a connection of Prince Vasily's. The elderly lady who had been sitting with the old aunt rose hurriedly and overtook Prince Vasily in the anteroom. All the affection of interest she had assumed had left her kindly and tear-worn face, and it now expressed only anxiety and fear. How about my son Boris, Prince? Said she, hurrying after him in the anteroom. I can't remain any longer in Petersburg. Tell me what news I may take back to my poor boy. Although Prince Vasily listened reluctantly and not very politely to the elderly lady, even betraying some impatience, she gave him an ingratiating and appealing smile and took his hand that he might not go away. What would it cost you to say a word to the Emperor, and then he would be transferred to the guards at once, she said. Believe me, Princess, I am ready to do all I can, answered Prince Vasily, but it is difficult for me to ask the Emperor. I should advise you to appeal to Rumyantsev through Prince Golitsyn. That would be the best way. The elderly lady was a Princess Drupetskaya, belonging to one of the best families in Russia, but she was poor, and having long been out of society, had lost her former influential connections. She had now come to Petersburg to procure an appointment in the guards for her only son. It was in fact solely to meet Prince Vasily that she had obtained an invitation to Anna Pavlovna's reception, and had sat listening to the Vicomte's story. Prince Vasily's words frightened her, and embittered look clouded her once handsome face. But only for a moment, then she smiled again and clutched Prince Vasily's arm more tightly. Listen to me, Prince, she said. I have never yet asked you for anything, and I never will again, nor have I ever reminded you of my father's friendship for you. Okay. But now I entreat you, for God's sake, to do this for my son, and I shall always regard you as a benefactor, she added hurriedly. No, don't be angry, but promise. I have asked Golitsyn and he has refused. Be the kind-hearted man you always were, she said, trying to smile through the tears, though the tears were in her eyes. Papa, we shall be late, said Princess Helen, turning her beautiful head and looking over her classically molded shoulder as she stood waiting by the door. Influence in society, however, is a capital which has to be economized if it is to last. Prince Vasily knew this, and having once realized that if he asked on behalf of all who begged of him, he would soon be unable to ask for himself, he became chary, of using his influence. But in Princess Drubetskaya's case, he felt, after her second appeal, something like qualms of conscience. She had reminded him of what was quite true. He had been indebted to her father for the first steps in his career. Moreover, he could see by her manners that she was one of those women, mostly mothers, who, having once made up their minds, will not rest until they have gained their end, and are prepared, if necessary, to go on insisting day after day and hour after hour, and even to make scenes. This last consideration moved him. My dear Anna Mikhailovna, said he with the usual familiarity and wariness of tone, it is almost impossible for me to do what you ask, but to prove my devotion to you and how I respect your father's memory, I will do the impossible. Your son shall be transferred to the Guards. Here is my hand on it. Are you satisfied? My dear benefactor, this is what I expected from you. I knew your kindness. He turned to go. Wait, just a word. When he has been transferred to the Guards, she faltered. You are on good terms with Mikhail, I guess, Ilarinovich Kutuzov? Recommend Boris to him as adjutant. Then I shall be at rest. And then Prince Vasily smiled. No, I won't promise that. You don't know how Kutuzov is pestered since his appointment as commander-in-chief. He told me himself that all the Moscow ladies have conspired to give him all their sons as adjutants. No, but do promise I won't let you go, my dear benefactor. Papa, said the beautiful daughter in the same tone as before. We shall be late. Well, au revoir, goodbye. You hear her? Then tomorrow you will speak to the Emperor? Certainly, but about Kutuzov I do not promise. Do promise, Vasily, cried Anna Mikhailovna as he went with the smile of a coquettish girl, which at one time probably came naturally to her, but was now very ill-suited to her careworn face. Apparently she had forgotten her age, and by force of habit employed all the old feminine arts, but as soon as the prince had gone, her face resumed its former cold, artificial expression. She returned to the group where the Vicomte was still talking and again pretended to listen, while waiting till it would be time to leave. Her task was accomplished. Chapter 5. Let's see what else happens in this amazing party at Anna Pavlovna's. And what do you think of this latest comedy, The Coronation at Milan, asked Anna Pavlovna. And of the comedy of the people of Genoa, again, sorry about the pronunciation, I didn't look it up, my fault, and Lucca laying their petitions before Monsignor Bonaparte, and Monsignor Bonaparte sitting on a throne and granting the petitions of the nations. Adorable. It is enough to make one's head whirl. It is as if the whole world had gone crazy. Prince Andrew looked Anna Pavlovna straight in the face with a sarcastic smile. Again, sorry French, tu me la donnes gar à qui la touche, which apparently, this one has an English translation, means God has given it to me, let him who touches it beware. They say he was very fine when he said that, he remarked, repeating the words in Italian. Dio mi l'ha dato guaiaci la toci? I guess. So guard, be on guard those who touch it, I guess. I hope this will prove the last drop that will make the glass run over, Anna Pavlovna continued. The sovereigns will not be able to endure this man who is a menace to everything. Interesting point, by the way, which I guess one doesn't really think of when, think of Napoleon. Part of the reason people, the nobles of that day hated him because he was not a noble. So basically, because he came kind of after the whole, I think, after the whole French Revolution, but he was also kind of, you know, doing a revolution, but he was not doing it in the name of, say, you know, the workers or whatever. He was doing it for himself, but nonetheless, he was of a common birth. I think he was just a petty officer in the army or something like that, and then he kind of seized the power. I'm not actually sure how exactly he progressed to being to crowning himself the emperor. But I think, again, you know, something you don't really think about is how much they loathed him, because he represented, you know, kind of the fight of the commoners for power in a way, even though he was in many regards a dictator. But yeah, anyway, back to the story. The sovereigns, I do not speak of Russia, said the Vicomte, polite but hopeless. The sovereigns, madame, what have they done for Louis XVII, for the Queen, or Madame Elizabeth? Nothing. And he became more animated. And believe me, they are reaping the reward of their betrayal of the Bourbon cause. The sovereigns. Why, they are sending ambassadors to compliment the usurper. And sighing disdainfully, he again changed his position. Prince Hippolyte, who had been gazing at the Vicomte for some time, though through his lorgnette, suddenly turned completely around towards the little princess, and having asked for a needle, began tracing the Conde coat of arms on the table. He explained this to her with as much gravity as if she had asked him to do it. Baton de Gules and Carl de Gules d'Azur, my son Conde, said he. The princess listened, smiling. Yeah, sorry. I know that d'Azur is blue, and baton is probably a stick or a baton, and maison would be a mansion, a house of Conde, kind of like, you know, Game of Thrones, house of whatever. Anyway, that's all I understood from that French phrase. The princess listened, smiling. If Bonaparte remains on the throne of France a year longer, the Vicomte continued, with the air of a man who in a matter with which he is better acquainted than anyone else, does not listen to others, but follows the current of his own thought. Things will have gone too far. By intrigues, violence, exile, and executions, French society, I mean good French society, will have been forever destroyed. And then he shrugged his shoulders and spread out his hands. Pierre wished to make a remark, for the conversation interested him, but Anna Pavlovna, who had him under observation, interrupted. The Emperor Alexander, said she, with the melancholy which always accompanied any reference of hers to the imperial family, has declared that he will leave it to the French people themselves to choose their own form of government, and I believe that once free from the usurper, the whole nation will certainly throw itself into the arms of its rightful king, she concluded, trying to be amiable to the royalist emigrant. This is doubtful, said Prince Andrew. Monsieur le Vicomte quite rightly supposes that matters have already gone too far. I think it will be difficult to return to the old regime. From what I have heard, said Pierre, blushing and breaking into the conversation, almost all the aristocracy has already gone over to Bonaparte's side. It is the Bonapartists who say that, replied the Vicomte, without looking at Pierre. At the present time it is difficult to know the real state of French public opinion. Bonaparte has said so, remarked Prince Andrew, with a sarcastic smile. It was evident that he did not like the Vicomte, and was aiming his remarks at him, though without looking at him. It showed them the path to glory, but they did not follow it, Prince Andrew continued. I showed them the path to glory, but they didn't follow it, Prince Andrew continued after a short silence, again quoting Napoleon's words. I opened my antechambers, and they crowded in. I do not know how far he was justified in saying so. Not in the least, replied the Vicomte. After the murder of the Duke, even the most partial ceased to regard him as a hero. If to some people, he went on, turning to Anna Pavlovna, he ever was a hero, after the murder of the Duke there was one martyr more in heaven and one hero less on earth. Before Anna Paulina and the others had time to smile their appreciation of the Vicomte's epigram, Pierre again broke into the conversation, and though Anna Paulina felt sure he would say something inappropriate, she was unable to stop him. The execution of Duke d'Enghien, again, my apologies for the name wrecking, declared Monsieur Pierre, was a political necessity, and it seems to me that Napoleon showed greatness of soul by not fearing to take on himself the whole responsibility of that deed. Dieu, mon Dieu, muttered Anna Paulina in terrified whisper. What, Monsieur Pierre, do you consider the assassination shows greatness of soul? Said the little princess, smiling and drawing her work nearer to her. Oh, oh, exclaimed several voices. Capital, said Prince Hippolyte in English, and began slapping his knee with the palm of his hand. The Vicomte merely shrugged his shoulders. Pierre looked solemnly at his audience over his spectacles and continued. I say so, he continued desperately, because the Bourbons fled from the revolution, leaving the people to anarchy, and Napoleon alone understood the revolution and quelled it, and so for the general good he could not stop short for the sake of one man's life. Won't you come over to the other table, suggested Anna Paulina, but Pierre continued his speech without heeding her. No, cried he, becoming more and more eager. Napoleon is great because he rose superior to the revolution, suppressed its abuses, preserved all that was good in it, equality of citizenship and freedom of speech and of press, and only for that reason did he obtain power. Yes, if having obtained power without availing himself of it to commit murder, he had restored it to the rightful king, I should have called him a great man, remarked the Vicomte. He could not do that. The people only gave him power that he might rid them of the Bourbons, and because they saw that he was a great man, and also that Napoleon was a great man. The revolution was a grand thing, continued Monsieur Pierre, betraying by this desperate and provocative proposition his extreme youth and his wish to express all that was in his mind. What? Revolution and regicide a grand thing? Well, after that. But won't you come to this table? Repeated Anna Paulina. Rousseau's Contrat Social, whatever, I think that is also meant to be French, said the Vicomte with a tolerant smile. I'm not speaking of regicide, I'm speaking about ideas. Yes, ideas of robbery, murder, and regicide, again interjected an ironical voice. Those were extremes, no doubt, but they are not what is most important. What is important are the rights of man, emancipation from the prejudices, and equality of citizenship, and all these ideas Napoleon has retained in full force. Liberty and equality, said the Vicomte contemptuously, as if at last deciding seriously to prove to this youth how foolish his words were. High-sounding words which have long been discredited. Who does not love liberty and equality? Even our Savior preached liberty and equality. Have people since the revolution become happier? On the contrary, we wanted liberty, but Bonaparte has destroyed it. Prince Andrew kept looking with an amused smile from Pierre to the Vicomte, and from the Vicomte to the hostess. In the first moment of Pierre's outburst, Anna Paulina, despite her social experience, was horror-struck. But when she saw that Pierre's sacrilegious words had not exasperated the Vicomte and had convinced herself that it was impossible to stop him, she rallied her forces and joined the Vicomte in a vigorous attack on the orator. But my dear Monseigneur Pierre, she said, how do you explain the fact of a great man executing a duke? A duke. I think maybe I'm supposed to be saying duke, because it's spelled D-U-C here. So a duke, let's just call him a duke. He probably was a duke. Or even an ordinary man who is innocent and untried. I should like, said the Vicomte, to ask how Monseigneur explains the 18th Brumaire. Was not that an imposture? It was a swindle, and not at all like the conduct of a great man. I'm not sure what that is referring to. And the prisoners he killed in Africa, that was horrible, said the little princess, shrugging her shoulders. He's a low fellow, say what you will, remarked Prince Hippolyte. Pierre, not knowing whom to answer, looked at them all and smiled. His smile was unlike the half-smile of other people. When he smiled, he gave his grave, even rather gloomy look was instantaneously replaced by another, a childlike, kindly, even rather silly look, which seemed to ask forgiveness. The Vicomte, who was meeting him for the first time, saw clearly that this young Jacobin was not so terrible as his words suggested. All were silent. How do you expect him to answer you all at once? Said Prince Andrew. Besides, in the actions of a statesman, one has to distinguish between his acts of private person, as a general and as an emperor, so it seems to me. Yes, yes, of course, Pierre chimed in, pleased at the arrival of this reinforcement. One must admit, continued Prince Andrew, that Napoleon as a man was great on the bridge of Arcola and in the hospital in Jaffa where he gave his hand to the plague-stricken. But there are other acts which it is difficult to justify. Prince Andrew, who had evidently wished to tone down the awkwardness of Pierre's remarks, rose and made a sign to his wife that it was time to go. Suddenly Prince Hippolyte started up making signs to everyone to attend and asking them all to be seated, began. I was told a charming Moscow story today, and must treat you to it. Excuse me, Vicomte, I must tell it in Russian, or the point will be lost. And Prince Hippolyte began to tell his story in such Russian as a Frenchman would speak after spending about a year in Russia. Everyone waited so emphatically and eagerly did. So everyone waited so emphatically and eagerly did he demand their attention to his story. There is in Moscow a lady, une dame, and she is very stingy. She must have 2 footmen behind her carriage, and very big ones. That was her taste, and she had a lady's maid, also big, she said. Here Prince Hippolyte paused, evidently collecting his ideas with difficulty. She said, oh yes, she said, girl, to the maid, put on a livery, get up behind the carriage, and come with me while I make some calls. Here Prince Hippolyte spluttered and burst out laughing long before his audience, which produced an effect unfavorable to the narrator. Several persons, among them the elderly lady and Anna Pavlovna, did, however, smile. She went. Suddenly there was a great wind. The girl lost her hat, and her long hair came down. Here he could contain himself no longer, and went on, between gasps of laughter, and the whole world knew. And so the anecdote ended. Though it was unintelligible why he had told it, or why it had to be told in Russian, still Anna Pavlovna and the others appreciated Prince Hippolyte's social tact in so agreeably ending Pierre's unpleasant and unamiable outburst. After the anecdote, the conversation broke up into insignificant small talk about the last and next balls, about theatricals, and who would meet whom, and when, and where. Chapter 6. Having thanked Anna Pavlovna for her charming soiree, the guests began to take their leave. Pierre was ungainly, stout about the average height, broad with huge red hands. He did not know, as the saying is, how to enter a drawing-room, and still less how to leave one. That is, how to say something particularly agreeable before going away. Besides this, he was absent-minded. When he rose to go, he took up instead of his own the general's 3-cornered hat and held it, pulling on the plume, till the general asked him to restore it. All this absent-mindedness and inability to enter a room and converse in it was, however, redeemed by his kindly, simple, and modest expression. Anna Pavlovna turned towards him, and with a Christian mildness that expressed forgiveness of his indiscretion, nodded and said, I hope to see you again, but also hope you will change your opinions, my dear Monsieur Pierre. When she said this, he did not reply and only bowed, but again everybody saw his smile, which said nothing unless, perhaps, opinions are opinions, but you are what a capital good-natured fellow, but you see what a capital good-natured fellow I am. And everyone, including Anna Pavlovna, felt this. Prince Andrew had gone out into the hall, and turning his shoulders to the footman who was helping him on with his cloak, listened indifferently to his wife's chatter with Prince Hippolyte, who had also come into the hall. Prince Hippolyte stood close to the pretty pregnant princess and stared fixedly at her through his eyeglass. Go in, Annette, or you will catch cold, said the little princess, taking leave of Anna Pavlovna. It is settled, she added in a low voice. Anna Pavlovna had already managed to speak to Lise about the match she contemplated between Anatoly and the little princess's sister-in-law. I rely on you, my dear, said Anna Pavlovna, also in low tone. Write to her and let me know how her father looks at the matter. Au revoir. And she left the hall. Prince Hippolyte approached the little princess, and bending his face close to her, began to whisper something. 2 footmen, the princess and his own, stood holding shawl and a cloak. Waiting for the conversation to finish, they listened to the French sentences which to them were meaningless, with an air of understanding, but not wishing to appear to do so. The princess, as usual, spoke smilingly and listened with a laugh. "I'm very glad I did not go to the ambassador," said Prince Hippolyte. "So dull. It has been delightful evening, has it not? Delightful." "They say the ball will be very good," replied the princess, drawing up her downy little lip. "All the pretty women in society will be there." "Not all, for you will not be there, not all," said Prince Hippolyte, smiling joyfully, and snatching the shawl from the footman, whom he even pushed aside, he began wrapping it around the princess. Either from awkwardness or intentionally, no one could have said which. After the shawl had been adjusted, he kept his arm around her for a long time, as though embracing her. Still smiling, she gracefully moved away, turning and glancing at her husband. Prince Andrew's eyes were closed, so weary and sleepy did he seem. "Are you ready?" he asked his wife, looking past her. Prince Hippolyte hurriedly put on his cloak, which in the latest fashion reached to his very heels, and stumbling in it ran out into the porch, following the princess, whom a footman was helping into the carriage. "Princess, au revoir," cried he, stumbling with his tongue and as well as with his feet. The princess, picking up her dress, was taking her seat in the dark carriage. Her husband was adjusting his sabre. Prince Hippolyte, under pretense of helping, was in everyone's way. "Allow me, sir," said Prince Andrew in Russian, in a cold, disagreeable tone to Prince Hippolyte, who was blocking his path. "I'm expecting you, Pierre," said the same voice, but gently and affectionately. The position started, the carriage wheels rattled. Prince Hippolyte laughed spasmodically as he stood in the porch, waiting for the Vicomte whom he had promised to take home. "Well, mon cher," said the Vicomte, having seated himself beside Hippolyte in the carriage, "your little princess is very nice indeed, quite French." And he kissed the tips of his fingers. Hippolyte burst out laughing. "Do you know you are a terrible chap for all your innocent airs?" continued the Vicomte. "I pity the poor husband, that little officer who gives himself the airs of a monarch." Hippolyte spluttered again, and amid his laughter said, "And you were saying that the Russian ladies are not equal to the French? One has to know how to deal with them." Pierre, reaching the house, first went into Prince Andrew's study, like one quite at home, and from habit immediately lay down on the sofa, took from the shelf the first book that came to his hand. It was Caesar's Commentaries, and resting on his elbow, began reading it in the middle. "What have you done to Mademoiselle Scherer? She will be quite ill now," said Prince Andrew as he entered the study, rubbing his small white hands. This is a quick switch from one scene to another without even a break in the paragraph. Anyway, Pierre turned his whole body, making the sofa creak. He lifted his eager face to Prince Andrew, smiled and waved his hand. "That abbey is very interesting, but he does not see the thing in the right light. In my opinion, perpetual peace is possible, but I do not know how to express it, not by a balance of political power." It was evident that Prince Andrew was not interested in such abstract conversation. One can't everywhere say all one thinks, mon cher. Well, have you at last decided on anything? Are you going to be a guardsman or a diplomatist? Diplomatist? Okay, well, diplomat, I guess," asked Prince Andrew after a momentary silence. Pierre sat up on the sofa with his legs tucked under him. "Really, I don't know. I don't like either the one or the other. But you must decide on something. Your father expects it." Pierre, at the age of 10, had been sent abroad with an abbé as a tutor, and had remained away till he was 20. When he returned to Moscow, his father dismissed the abbé and said to the young man, "Now go to Petersburg, look around, and choose your profession. I will agree to anything. Here's a letter to Prince Vasily, and here is money. Write to me all about it, and I will help you in everything." Pierre had already been choosing a career for 3 months, and had not decided on anything. It was about this choice that Prince Andrew was speaking. Pierre rubbed his forehead. "But he must be a Freemason," said he, referring to the abbé whom he had met that evening. "That is all nonsense," Prince Envee again interrupted him. "Let us talk of business. Have you been to the Horse Guards?" "No, I have not, but this is what I have been thinking and wanting to tell you. There is a war now against Napoleon. If it were a war for freedom, I could understand it, and should be the first to enter the army. But to help England and Austria against the greatest man in the world is not right. Prince Andrew only shrugged his shoulders at Pierre's childish words. He put on the air of one who finds it impossible to reply to such nonsense. But it would, in fact, have been difficult to give any other answer than the one Prince Andrew gave to this naive question. If no one fought except on his own conviction, there would be no wars, he said. And that would be splendid, said Pierre. Prince Andrew smiled ironically. Very likely it would be splendid, but it will never come about. Well, why are you going to the war? Asked Pierre. What for? I don't know. I must. Besides that I'm going, he paused. I am going because the life I am leading here does not suit me. Chapter 7. The rustle of a woman's dress was heard in the next room. Prince Andrew shook himself as if waking up, and his face assumed the look it had had in Anna Paulina's drawing room. Pierre removed his feet from the sofa. The princess came in. She had changed her gown for a house dress as fresh and elegant as the other. Prince Andrew rose and politely placed a chair for her. How is it, she began as usual in French, settling down briskly and fussily in the easy chair. How is it Annette never got married? How stupid you men all are not to have married her. Excuse me for saying so, but you have no sense about women. What an argumentative fellow you are, Monsieur Pierre. And I am still arguing with your husband. I can't understand why he wants to go to the war, replied Pierre, addressing the princess with none of the embarrassment so commonly shown by young men in their intercourse with young women. The princess started. Evidently Pierre's words touched her to the quick. Oh, that is just what I tell him, she said. I don't understand it. I don't in the least understand why men can't live without wars. How is it that we women don't want anything of the kind, don't need it? Now you shall judge between us. I always tell him, here he is, uncle's aide-de-camp, a most brilliant position. He is so well known, so much appreciated by everyone. The other day at the Apraxins, I heard a lady asking, is that the famous Prince Andrew? I did indeed. I did hear that indeed, I guess. She laughed. He is so well received everywhere, he might easily become aide-de-camp to the Emperor. You know, the Emperor spoke to him most graciously. Annette and I were speaking of how to arrange it. What do you think? Pierre looked at his friend and, noticing that he did not like the conversation, gave no reply. When are you starting? He asked. Oh, don't speak of this going. Don't. I won't hear it spoken of, said the princess in the same petulantly playful tone in which she had spoken to Hippolyte in the drawing room, and which was so plainly ill-suited to the family circle of which Pierre was almost a member. Today, when I remembered that all these delightful associations must be broken off, and then, you know, André, she looked significantly at her husband. I'm afraid, she whispered, and shudder ran down her back. Her husband looked at her as if surprised to notice that someone besides Pierre and himself was in the room, and addressed her in a tone of frigid politeness. What is it that you are afraid of, Lise? I don't understand, said he. I don't understand why Tolstoy put said he after that as well, because he said he addressed her, and then there is the address, and after that he still says said he. I think it's weird. Maybe it was like something they did back in the 19th century, but this sounds a little bit superfluous to again say that it was he who said it. Anyway, there, what egotists men all are, all egotists, just for a whim of his own. Goodness only knows why he leaves me and locks me up alone in the country. With my father and sister, remember, said Prince Andrew gently. Alone all the same, without my friends, and he expects me not to be afraid. Her tone was now querulous, and her lip drawn up, giving her not a joyful but an animal, squirrel-like expression. She paused as if she felt it indecorous to speak of her pregnancy before Pierre, though the gist of the matter lay in that. I still can understand what you are afraid of, said Prince Andrew slowly, not taking his eyes off his wife. The princess blushed and raised her arms with a gesture of despair. No, Andrew, I must say you have changed. Oh, how you have. Your doctor tells you to go to bed earlier, said Prince Andrew. You had better go. The princess said nothing, but suddenly her short, downy lip quivered. Prince Andrew rose, shrugged his shoulders, and walked about the room. Pierre looked over his spectacles with naive surprise, now at him, now at her, moved as if about to rise, too, but changed his mind. Excuse me. Why should I mind Monsieur Pierre being here? Exclaimed the little princess suddenly, her pretty face all at once distorted by a tearful grimace. I have long wanted to ask you, Andrew, why you have changed so to me. What have I done to you? You are going to the war and have no pity for me. Why is it? Liz, was all Prince Andrew said, but that one word expressed an entreaty, a threat, and above all a conviction that she should herself regret her words. But she went on hurriedly. You treat me like an invalid or a child. I see it all. Did you behave like that 6 months ago? Liz, I beg you, desist, said Prince Andrew still more emphatically. Pierre, who had been growing more and more agitated as he listened to all this, rose and approached the princess. He seemed unable to bear the sight of tears and was ready to cry himself. Come yourself, princess. It seems you so to you because I assure you I myself have experienced, and so because... No, excuse me, an outsider is out of place here. No, don't distress yourself. Goodbye. Prince Andrew caught him by the hand. No, wait, Pierre. The princess is too kind to wish to deprive me of the pleasure of spending the evening with you. No, he thinks only of himself, muttered the princess without restraining her angry tears. Liz, said Prince Andrew dryly, raising his voice to the pitch which indicated the patience is exhausted. Suddenly the angry, squirrel-like expression of the princess's pretty face changed into a winning and piteous look of fear. Her beautiful eyes glanced askance at her husband's face, and her own assumed the timid, deprecating expression of a dog when it rapidly but feebly wags its drooping tail. Mon Dieu, she muttered, and lifting her dress with one hand, she went up to her husband and kissed him on the forehead. Good night, Liz, said he, rising and cautiously kissing her hand as he would have done to a stranger. Chapter 8. The friends were silent. Neither cared to begin talking. Pierre continually glanced at Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew rubbed his forehead with his small hand. Let us go and have supper, he said with a sigh, going to the door. They entered the elegant, newly decorated and luxurious dining room. Everything from the table napkins to the silver, china, and glass bore that imprint of newness found in the households of the newly married. Halfway through the supper, Prince Andrew leaned his elbows on the table, and with a look of nervous agitation such as Pierre had never before seen on his face, began to talk, as one who has long had something on his mind and suddenly determines to speak out. Never marry, my dear fellow. That's my advice. Never marry till you can say to yourself that you have done all you are capable of, and until you have ceased to love the woman of your choice and have seen her plainly as she is, or else you will make a cruel and irrevocable mistake. Marry when you are old and good for nothing, or all that is good and noble in you will be lost. It will all be wasted on trifles. Yes, don't look at me with such surprise. If you marry expecting anything from yourself in the future, you will feel at every step that for you all is ended. All is closed except the drawing room, where you will be ranged side by side with a court lackey and an idiot. But what's the good? And he waved his arm. What's the good? Okay. Pierre took off his spectacles, which made his face seem different and the good-natured expression still more apparent, and gazed at his friend in amazement. My wife, continued Prince Andrew, is an excellent woman, one of those rare women with whom a man's honor is safe. But, oh God, what would I not give now to be unmarried? You are the first and only one to whom I mention this, because I like you. As he said this, Prince Andrew was less than ever like that Balkonsky who had lolled in Anna Pavlovna's easy chairs and with half-closed eyes had uttered French phrases between his teeth. Every muscle on his thin face was now quivering with nervous excitement. His eyes, in which the fire of life had seemed extinguished, now flashed with brilliant light. It was evident that the more lifeless he seemed at ordinary times, the more impassioned he became in those moments of almost morbid irritation. You don't understand why I say this, he continued, but it is the whole story of life. You talk of Bonaparte and his career, said he, though Pierre had not mentioned Bonaparte. But Bonaparte, when he worked, went step by step towards his goal. He was free. He had nothing but his aim to consider, and he reached it. But tie yourself up with a woman, and like a chained convict, you lose all freedom, and all you have to hope and strength merely weighs. And all you have of hope and strength merely weighs you down and torments you with regret. Drawing rooms, gossip, balls, vanity, and triviality. These are the enchanted circle I cannot escape from. I am now going to the war, the greatest war there ever was, and I know nothing, and I am fit for nothing. I am very amiable and have a caustic wit, continued Prince Andrew, and at Anna Pavlovna's they listen to me. And that stupid set without whom my wife cannot exist, and those women, if you only knew what those society women are, and women in general. My father is right. Selfish, vain, stupid, trivial in everything. That's what women are when you see them in their true colors. When you meet them in society, it seems as if there were something in them, but there's nothing. No, don't marry, my dear fellow, don't marry, concluded Prince Andrew. It seems funny to me, said Pierre, that you should consider yourself incapable and your life a spoiled life. You have everything before you, everything, and you... He did not finish his sentence, but his tone showed how highly he thought of his friend and how much he expected of him in the future. How can he talk like that, thought Pierre. He considered his friend a model of perfection, because Prince Andrew possessed in the highest degree just the very qualities Pierre lacked, and which might be best described as strength of will. Pierre was always astonished at Prince Andrew's calm manner of treating everybody, his extraordinary memory, his extensive reading. He had read everything, knew everything, and had an opinion about everything. But above all, his capacity for work and study, and if Pierre was often struck by Andrew's lack of capacity for philosophical meditation, to which he himself was particularly addicted, he regarded even this not as a defect, but as a sign of strength. Even in the best, most friendly, and simplest relations of life, praise and commendations are essential, just as grease is necessary to wheels, that they may run smoothly. My part is played out, said Prince Andrew. What's the use of talking about me? Let us talk about you, he added after a silence, smiling at his reassuring thoughts. That smile was immediately reflected on Pierre's face. But what is there to say about me, said Pierre, his face relaxing into a careless, merry smile. What am I? An illegitimate son. He suddenly blushed crimson, and it was plain that he had made a great effort to say this. Without a name and without means. And it really, but he did not say what it really was. For the present I am free and I am all right. Only I haven't the least idea what I am to do. I wanted to consult you seriously. Prince Andrew looked kindly at him, yet his glance, friendly and affectionate as it was, expressed a sense of his own superiority. I am fond of you, especially as you are the one live man among our whole set. Yes, you are all right. Choose what you will, it's all the same. You'll be all right anywhere. But look here, give up visiting those Kurigans and leading the sort of life. It suits you too badly, all this debauchery, dissipation, and the rest of it. What would you have me, my dear fellow? Answered Pierre, shrugging his shoulders. Women, my dear fellow, women. I don't understand it, replied Prince Andrew. Women who are comme il faut, that's different matter. But the Kurigans, set of women of wine, I don't understand. Pierre was staying at Prince Vasily Kuragin's and sharing the dissipated life of his son Anatoly, the son whom they were planning to reform by marrying him to Prince Andrew's sister. "Do you know," said Pierre, as if suddenly struck by a happy thought, "seriously, I have long been thinking of it. Leading such a life, I can't decide or think properly about anything. One's head aches, and one spends all one's money. He asked me for tonight, but I won't go. You give me a word of honor not to go?" "On my honor." Chapter 9. It was past 1 o'clock when Pierre left his friend. It was a cloudless, northern summer night. Pierre took an open cab intending to drive straight home. But the nearer he drew to the house, the more he felt the impossibility of going to sleep on such a night. It was light enough to see a long way in the deserted street, and it seemed more like morning or evening than night. On the way, Pierre remembered that Anatoly Kuragin was expecting the usual set for cards that evening, after which there was generally a drinking bout, finished with visits of a kind Pierre was very fond of. "I should like to go to Kuragin's," thought he, but he immediately recalled his promise to Prince Andrew not to go there. Then, as happens to people of weak character, he desired so passionately once more to enjoy that dissipation he was so accustomed to, that he decided to go. The thought immediately occurred to him that his promise to Prince Andrew was of no account, because before he gave it, he had already promised Prince Anatoly to come to his gathering. Besides, thought he, all such words of honor are conventional things with no definite meaning, especially if one considers that by tomorrow one may be dead, or something so extraordinary may happen to one that honor and dishonor will be all the same. Pierre often indulged in reflections of this sort, nullifying all his decisions and intentions. He went to Kuragin's. Reaching the large house near the house guard's barracks in which Anatoly lived, Pierre entered the lighted porch, ascended the stairs, and went into the open door. There was no one in the anteroom. Empty bottles, cloaks, and overshoes were lying about. There was a smell of alcohol and sounds of voices and shouting in the distance. Cards and supper were over, but the visitors had not yet dispersed. Pierre threw off his cloak and entered the first room, in which were the remains of supper. A footman, thinking no one saw him, was drinking on the sly what was left in the glasses. From the third room came sound of laughter, the shouting of familiar voices, the growling of bear, and a general commotion. Some 8 or 9 young men were crowding anxiously around an open window. 3 others were romping with a young bear, one pulling him by the chain and trying to set him at the others. "I bet 100 on Stevens," shouted one. "Mind, no holding on," cried another. "I bet on Dolokhov," cried third. "Kuragin, you part our hands." "There, leave Bruin alone. Here's a bet on. At 1 draft or he loses," shouted the fourth. "Jacob, bring a bottle," shouted the host, a tall, handsome fellow who stood in the midst of the group, without a coat, and with his fine linen shirt unfastened in front. "Wait a bit, you fellows. Here is Petya, good man," cried he, addressing Pierre. Another voice from a man of medium height with clear blue eyes, particularly striking among all these drunken voices by its sober ring, cried from the window, "Come here, part the bets." This was Dolokhov, an officer of the Semenov regiment, a notorious gambler and duelist who was living with Anatoly. Pierre smiled, looking about him merrily. "I don't understand. What is all about?" "Wait a bit, he's not drunk yet. A bottle here," said Anatoly, taking glass from the table. He went up to Pierre. "First of all, you must drink." Pierre drank one glass after another, looking from under his brows at the tipsy guests who were again crowding around the window and listening to the chatter. Anatoly kept on refilling Pierre's glass while explaining that Dolokhov was betting with Stevens, an English naval officer, that he would drink a bottle of rum sitting on the outer ledge of the third floor window with his legs hanging out. Go on, you must drink it all, said Anatoly, giving Pierre the last glass, or I won't let you go. No, I won't, said Pierre, pushing Anatoly aside, and he went up to the window. Dolokhov was holding the Englishman's hand and clearly and distinctly repeating the terms of the bet, addressing himself particularly to Anatoly and Pierre. Dolokhov was of medium height, with curly hair and light blue eyes. He was about 25. Like all infantry officers, he wore no moustache, so that his mouth, the most striking feature of his face, was clearly seen. The lines of that mouth were remarkably finely carved. The middle of the upper lip formed a sharp wedge and closed firmly on the firm lower one, and something like two distinct smiles played continually round the two corners of the mouth. This, together with the resolute, insolent intelligence of his eyes, produced an effect which made it impossible not to notice his face. Dolokhov was a man of small means and no connections. Yet, though Anatoly spent tens of thousands of rubles, Dolokhov lived with him and had placed himself on such a footing that all who knew them, including Anatoly himself, respected him more than they did Anatoly. Dolokhov could play all games and nearly always won. However much he drank, he never lost his clear-headedness. Both Kuragin and Dolokhov were at the same time notorious among the rakes and scapegraces? I don't even know what that is. Let's check it out. Scapegraces of Petersburg. Scapegrace. Scapegrace is a mischievous or wayward person, especially a young person or a child, a rascal. Alright, okay. And we're back. The bottle of rum was brought. The window frame which prevented anyone from sitting on the outer sill was being forced out by two footmen, who were evidently flurried and intimidated by the directions and shouts of the gentlemen around. Anatoly, with his swaggering air, strode up to the window. He wanted to smash something. Pushing away the footman, he tugged at the frame, but could not move it. He smashed the pane. "You have a try, Hercules," said he, turning to Pierre. Pierre seized the crossbeam, tugged, and wrenched the oak frame out with a crash. "Take it right out, or they'll think I'm holding on," said Dolokhov. Is the Englishman bragging? Eh? Is it all right?" said Anatoly. "First rate," said Pierre, looking at Dolokhov, who, with a bottle of rum in his hand, was approaching the window, from which the light of the sky, the dawn merging with the afterglow of sunset, was visible. Dolokhov, the bottle of rum still in his hand, jumped out into the window sill. "Listen," cried he, standing there and addressing those in the room. All were silent. "I bet 50 imperials," he spoke French that the Englishman might understand him, but he did not speak it very well. "I bet 50 imperials, or do you wish to make it 100, added he, addressing the Englishman. "No, 50, replied the latter. "All right, 50 imperials, that I would drink a whole bottle of rum without taking it from my mouth, sitting outside the window on this spot." He stooped and pointed to the sloping ledge outside the window, "and without holding on to anything. Is that right?" "Quite right," said the Englishman. Anatoly turned to the Englishman, and taking him by one of the buttons of his coat and looking down at him, the Englishman was short, began repeating the terms of the wager to him in English. "Wait," cried Dolokhov, hammering with the bottle on the window sill to attract attention. "Wait a bit, Kuragin, listen. If anyone else does the same, I will pay him 100 imperials. Do you understand?" The Englishman nodded, but gave no indication whether he intended to accept this challenge or not. Anatoly did not release him, and though he kept nodding to show that he understood, Anatoly went on, translating Dolokhov's words into English. A thin young lad, a hussar of the Life Guards, who had been losing that evening, climbed on the windowsill, leaned over, and looked down. Oh, he muttered, looking down from the window at the stones of the pavement. "Shut up," cried Dolokhov, pushing him away from the window. The lad jumped awkwardly back into the room, tripping over his spurs. Placing the bottle in the windowsill where he could reach it easily, Dolokhov climbed carefully and slowly through the window and lowered his legs. Pressing against both sides of the window, he adjusted himself on the seat, lowered his hands, moved a little to the right and then to the left, and took up the bottle. Anatoly brought 2 candles and placed them on the windowsill, though it was already quite light. Dolohkov's back in his white shirt and his curly head were lit up from both sides. Everyone crowded to the window. The Englishman in front, Pierre, stood smiling but silent, One man, older than the others present, suddenly pushed forward with a scared and angry look and wanted to seize hold of Dolohov's shirt. "I say, this is folly. He'll be killed," said this more sensible man, and Tully stopped him. "Don't touch him. You'll startle him and then he'll be killed, eh? What then, eh?" Dolohov turned round and again, holding on to with both hands, arranged himself on his seat. "If anyone comes meddling again," said he, emitting the words separately through his thin compressed lips, "I will throw him down there. Now then." Saying this, he again turned round, dropped his hands, took the bottle and lifted it to his lips, threw back his head and raised his free hand to balance himself. One of the footmen, who had stooped to pick up some broken glass, remained in that position without taking his eyes from the window, and then Dolohov's back, and Anatoly stood erect with staring eyes. The Englishman looked on sideways, pursing up his lips. The man who had wished to stop the affair ran to a corner of the room and threw himself on a sofa with his face to the wall. Pierre hid his face, from which a faint smile forgot to fade, though his features now expressed horror and fear. All were still. Pierre took his hands from his eyes. Dolohov still sat in the same position, only his head was thrown further back till his curly hair touched his shirt collar, and the hand holding the bottle was lifted higher and higher and trembled with the effort. The bottle was emptying perceptibly and rising still higher, and his head tilting yet further back. "Why is it so long?" thought Pierre. It seemed to him that more than half an hour had elapsed. Suddenly Dolohov made a backward movement with his spine, and his arm trembled nervously. This was sufficient to cause his whole body to slip as he sat on the sloping ledge. As he began slipping down, his head and arm wavered still more with the strain. One hand moved as if to clutch the window sill, but refrained from touching it. Pierre again covered his eyes and thought he would never open them again. Suddenly he was aware of a stir all around. He looked up. Dolohov was standing on the windowsill with a pale but radiant face. "It's empty." He threw the bottle to the Englishman, who caught it neatly. Dolohov jumped down. He smelt strongly of rum. "Well done, fine fellow. There's a bet for you. Devil take you," came from different sides. The Englishman took out his purse and began counting out the money. Dolohov stood frowning and did not speak. Pierre jumped upon the windowsill. "Gentlemen, who wishes to bet with me? I'll do the same thing," he suddenly cried. "Even without a bet, there. Tell them to bring me a bottle. I'll do it. Bring a bottle." Let him do it. Let him do it," said Dolohov, smiling. "What next? Have you gone mad? No one would let you. Why, you go giddy even on a staircase," exclaimed several voices. "I'll drink it. Let's have a bottle of rum," shouted Pierre, banging on the table with a determined and drunken gesture and preparing to climb out the window. They seized him by his arms, but he was so strong that everyone who touched him was sent flying. "No, you'll never manage him that way," said Anatoly. "Wait a bit and I'll get round him. Listen, I'll take your bet tomorrow, but now we are all going to somewhere. Apparently it's redacted." "Come on then," said Pierre. "Come on, and we'll take Bruin with us." And he caught the bear. Oh, that's the bear. Bruin is the bear. Okay. And he caught the bear, took it in his arms, lifted it from the ground, and began dancing round the room with it. Chapter 10. Prince Vasily kept the promise he had given to Princess Drubetskaya, who had spoken to him on behalf of her only son Boris on the evening of Anna Pavlovna's soiree, I think. The matter was mentioned to the emperor, an exception made, and Boris transferred into the regiment of Semenov Guards with the rank of a cornet. He received, however, no appointment to Kutuzov's staff despite all Anna Mikhailovna's endeavors and entreaties. Soon after Anna Pavlovna's reception, Anna Mikhailovna returned to Moscow and went straight to her rich relations, the Rostovs, with whom she stayed when in town, and where her darling Bori had only just entered a regiment of line and was being at once transferred to the Guards as a cornet. had been educated from childhood and lived for years at a time. The guards had already left Petersburg on the 5th of August, and her son, who had remained in Moscow for his equipment, was to join them on the march to Radzivlov. It was Saint Natalia's day and the name day of two of the Rostovs, the mother and the youngest daughter, both named Natalie. Ever since the morning, carriages with 6 horses had been coming and going continually, bringing visitors to the Countess Rostov's big house on the Povarskaya, so well known to all Moscow. The Countess herself and her handsome eldest daughter were in the drawing room with the visitors who came to congratulate and who constantly succeeded one another in relays. The Countess was a woman of about 45 with a thin oriental type of face, evidently worn out with childbearing. She had had 12. Jesus. A languor of motion and speech resulting from weakness gave her a distinguished air which inspired respect. Princess Anna Mikhailovna Drubetskaya, who, as a member of the household, was also seated in the drawing room, helped to receive and entertain the visitors. The young people were in one of the inner rooms, not considering it necessary to take part in receiving the visitors. The Count met the guests and saw them off, inviting them all to dinner. "I'm very, very grateful to you, mon cher, or ma chère, I guess. I'm sorry, French." He called everyone without exception and without the slightest variation in his tone, "my dear," whether they were above or below him in rank. "I thank you for myself and for our 2 dear ones, whose name day we are keeping. But mind you come to dinner, or I shall be offended, ma chère. On behalf of the whole family, I beg you to come, mon cher." These words he repeated to everyone without exception or variation, and with the same expression on his full, cheerful, clean-shaven face, the same firm pressure of his hand, and the same quick, repeated bows. As soon as he had seen a visitor off, he returned to one of those who were still in the drawing room, drew a chair towards him or her, and jointly spreading out his legs and putting his hands on his knees, with the air of a man who enjoys life and knows how to live, he swayed to and fro with dignity, offered surmises about the weather, or touched on questions of health, sometimes in Russian and sometimes in very bad but self-confident French. Then again, like a man very wary but unflinching in the fulfillment of duty, he rose to see some visitors off, and stroking his scanty grey hairs over his bald patch, also asked them to dinner. Sometimes on his way back from the anteroom, he would pass through the conservatory and pantry into the large marble dining hall, where tables were being set out for 80 people, and looking at the footmen who were bringing in silver and china, moving tables and unfolding damask table linen, he would call Dmitri Vasilievich a man of good family and the manager of all his affairs, and while looking with pleasure at the enormous table would say, "Well, Dmitri, you'll see the things are all as they should be. That's right. The great thing is the great thing is the serving. That's it." And with a complacent sigh, he would return to the drawing room. Sorry, where's a strange sentence there? "Maria Lvovna Karagina and her daughter," announced the Countess, gigantic footman in his bass voice, entering the drawing room. The Countess reflected a moment and took a pinch from a gold snuff-box with her husband's portrait on it. That's great. "I'm quite worn out by these callers. However, I'll see her and no more. She is so affected. Ask her in," she said to the footman in a sad voice, as if saying, "Very well, finish me off." A tall, stout and proud-looking woman with a round-faced, smiling daughter entered the drawing room, their dresses rustling. "Dear Countess, what an age! She has been laid upon, poor child, at the Razumovsky's ball, and Countess Apraxina, I was so delighted," came the sounds of animated feminine voices, interrupting one another and mingling with the rustling of dresses and the scraping of chairs. Then one of those conversations began which last out until, at the first pause, the guests rise with the rustle of dresses and say, "I am so delighted, Mamma's health, and Countess Apraskina," and then again rustling pass into the anteroom, but put on cloaks or mantles and drive away. The conversation was on the chief topic of the day, the illness of the wealthy and celebrated view of Catherine's Day Count Bezukhov, and about his illegitimate son Pierre, the one who had behaved so improperly at Anna Pavlovna's reception. "I am so sorry that the poor Count," said the visitor. I'm so sorry for the poor Count," said the visitor. "He is in such bad health, and now this vexation upon his son is enough to kill him." "What is that?" asked the Countess, as if she did not know what the visitor alluded to, though she had already heard about the cause of Count Bezukhov's distress some 15 times. "That's what comes of a modern education," exclaimed the visitor. "It seems that while he was abroad, this young man was allowed to do as he liked. Now in Petersburg, I hear he has been doing such terrible things that he has been expelled by the police." "You don't say so," replied the Countess. "He chose his friends badly," interrupted Anna Mikhailovna. "Prince Vasily's son, he and a certain Dolokhov have, it is said, been up to heaven only knows what, and they have had to suffer for it. Dolokhov has been degraded to the ranks, and Bezukhov's son sent back to Moscow. Anatoly Kuragin's father managed to somehow get his son's affair hushed up, but even he was ordered out of Petersburg." "But what have they been up to?" asked the Countess. "They are regular brigands." Brigands? I think it's brigands. "Especially Dolokhov," replied the visitor. "He is a son of Maria Ivanovna Dolokhova, such a worthy woman. But there, just fancy." Not sure what that means. These three got hold of a bear somewhere, put it in a carriage, and set off with it to visit some actresses. The police tried to interfere, and what did the young men do? They tied a policeman and the bear back to back and put the bear in the Moika Canal, and then and there was the bear swimming about with the policeman on his back. "What a nice figure the policeman must have cut, my dear," shouted the Count, dying with laughter. "Oh, how dreadful! How can you laugh at it, Count?" Yet the ladies themselves could not help laughing. It was all they could do to rescue the poor man, continued the visitor. "And to think it is Kirill Vladimirovich Bezukhov's son who amuses himself in this sensible manner. Okay, I guess now it's sensible. And he was said to be so well educated and clever. This is all that his foreign education has done for him. I hope that here in Moscow no one will receive him in spite of his money. They wanted to introduce him to me, but I quite declined. I have my daughters to consider." "Why do you say this young man is so rich?" asked the Countess, turning away from the girls, who at once assumed an air of inattention. "His children are all illegitimate. I think Pierre is also illegitimate." The visitor made a gesture with her hand. "I should think he has a score of them." Princess Anna Mikhailovna intervened in the conversation, evidently wishing to show her connections and knowledge of what went in society. The fact of the matter is," said she significantly, and also in a half whisper, "everyone knows Count Kirill's reputation. He has lost count of his children, but this Pierre was his favorite." "How handsome the old man still was only a year ago," remarked the Countess. "I have never seen a handsomer man." "He is very much altered now," said Anna Mikhailovna. "Well, as I was saying, Prince Vasily is the next heir through his wife, but the Count is very fond of Pierre, looking after his education, and wrote the Emperor about him, so that in the case of his death, and he is so ill that he may die at any moment, and Dr. Lorraine has come from Petersburg, no one knows who will inherit his immense fortune, Pierre or Prince Vasily. 40,000 serfs and millions of rubles. I know it all very well, for Prince Vasily told me himself. Besides, Kirill Vladimirovich is my mother's second cousin. He is also my Boris' godfather," she added, as if she attached no importance at all to that fact. "Prince Vasily arrived in Moscow yesterday. I hear he has come on some inspection business," remarked the visitor. "Yes, but between ourselves," said the princess, "this is a pretext. The fact he has come to see Count Kirill Vladimirovich, hearing how ill he is." "But do you know, my dear, that was a capital joke," said the Count, and seeing that the elder visitor was not listening, he turned to the young ladies. "I can just imagine what a funny figure that policeman cut." And as he waved his arms to impersonate the policeman, His portly form again shook with a deep, ringing laugh. The laugh of one who always eats well, and in particular, drinks well. "So do come and dine with us," he said. Chapter 11. Silence ensued. The Countess looked at her callers, smiling affably, but not concealing the fact that she would not be distressed if they now rose and took their leave. The visitor's daughter was already smoothing down her dress with an inquiring look at her mother, when suddenly from the next room were heard the footsteps of boys and girls running to the door, and the noise of a chair falling over, and a girl of 13 hiding something in the folds of her short muslin frock, darting in and stopped short in the middle of the room. It was evident that she had not intended her flight to bring her so far. Behind her, in the doorway, appeared a student with a crimson coat collar, an officer of the guards, a girl of 15, and a plump, rosy-faced boy in a short jacket. The Count jumped up and, swaying from side to side, spread his arms wide and threw them around the little girl who had run in. "Ah, here she is," he exclaimed, laughing. "My pet, whose name day it is, my dear pet." "Ma chère, there is a time for everything," said the Countess with a feigned severity. "You spoil her, Ilya," she added, turning to her husband. "How do you do, my dear? I wish you many happy returns of your name day," said the visitor. "What a charming child," she added, addressing the mother. This black-eyed, wide-mouthed girl, not pretty but full of life, with childish bare shoulders which, after her run, heaved and shook, her bodice. Okay. Wait, what's a bodice? Check it out. A historically an article of clothing for women covering the body from the neck to the waist. I hope it's pronounced as I did. Let's find it out. Definition. Bodice. Bodice? Okay. So her bodice was shaking, apparently. With black curls tossed backwards, thin, bare arms, little legs in lace-frilled drawers, and feet in low slippers. Was just at that charming age when a girl is no longer a child, though the child is not yet a young woman. Escaping from her father, she ran to hide her flushed face in the face of her mother's mantilla. Again, no idea what it is, but let's skip it. Not paying the least attention to her severe remark, and began to laugh. She laughed, and in fragmentary sentences tried to explain about the doll which she produced from the folds of her frock. "Do you see, my doll, Mimi, you see?" was all Natasha managed to utter. To her everything seemed funny. She leaned against her mother and burst into such a loud, ringing fit of laughter that even the prim visitor could not help joining in. "Now then, go away and take your monstrosity with you," said the mother, pushing away her daughter with pretended sternness, and turning to the visitor, she added, "She is my youngest girl." Natasha, raising her face for a moment from her mother's mantilla, glanced up at her through tears of laughter and again hid her face. The visitor, compelled to look on at this family scene, thought it necessary to take some part in it. "Tell me, my dear," said she to Natasha, "is Mimi a relation of yours? A daughter, I suppose?" Natasha did not like the visitor's tone of condescension to childish things. She did not reply, but looked at her seriously. Meanwhile, the younger generation, Boris the officer, Anna Mikhailovna's son, Nicholas the undergraduate, the Count's eldest son, Sonia the Count's 15-year-old niece, and little Petya, the youngest boy, had all settled down in the drawing room and were obviously trying to restrain within the bounds of decorum the excitement and mirth that shone in all their faces. Evidently in the back rooms from which they had dashed out so impatiously, the conversation had been more amusing than the drawing room talk of society scandals, the weather, and Countess Apraskina. Now and then they glanced at one another, hardly able to suppress their laughter. The two young men, the student and the officer, friends from childhood, were of the same age and both handsome fellows. though not alike. Boris was tall and fair, and his calm and handsome face had regular, delicate features. Nicholas was short, with curly hair and an open expression. Dark hairs were already showing on his upper lip. His obsession with upper lips, man. And his whole face expressed impetuosity and enthusiasm. Nicholas blushed when he entered the drawing room. He evidently tried to find something to say, but failed. Boris, on the contrary, at once found his footing and related quietly and humorously how he had known that doll Mimi when she was still quite a young lady before her nose was broken. Now she had aged during the 5 years he had known her, and how her head had cracked right across the skull. Having said this, he glanced at Natasha. She turned away from him and glanced at her younger brother, who was screwing up his eyes and shaking his with suppressed laughter, and unable to control herself any longer, she jumped up and rushed from the room as fast as her nimble little feet would carry her. Boris did not laugh. "You were meaning to go out, weren't you, Mama? Do you want the carriage?" he asked his mother with a smile. Yes, go and tell them to get it ready," she answered, returning his smile. Boris quietly left the room and went in search of Natasha. The plump boy ran after them angrily, as if vexed that their program had been disrupted.